Hello everybody, welcome to episode 219 of Shelf Reavers. Today we'll be going over the first volume of War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So here I have the vintage classics cover of War and Peace. Now this is a complete collection, obviously this isn't just the first volume. But first volume is about a good 293 pages, I believe. Let's check. It is, in fact, 294 pages. But yeah, so in this video I'll be going over the first volume, and I just kind of wanted to get into this book because I had set myself on reading two of the major, I guess, massive, not necessarily massive, but very large works of classics that I have in my collection, which are The Count of Monte Cristo and War and Peace here. Now, I've obviously read Don Quixote and stuff like that, so I have other large ones, but I've already read them. And these were the two biggest out of the classics, I guess, collection I have that I had to check out. So I ultimately ended up going with War and Peace because I had recently watched a video on a recap of The Count of Monte Cristo, and I had no idea. I came into this absolutely blind. So yeah, we're gonna check out War and Peace. So I kind of go over the story briefly. So the first volume is divided into three parts. Now the first part predominantly focuses on aristocratic life within Russia. We get introduced to our main characters of Nikolai Rostov, Andrei Bolkonsky, Pierre Bezukov, and Boris. Now, I don't remember exactly Boris's last name. It might be Mikhailovna, but I don't believe that actually is the case because his mother's name is Anna Mikhailovna, but I don't think his last name is Mikhailovna. But yeah, so Boris, he is a member of an aristocratic family that's kind of fallen from grace. They are kind of struggling on times, and we see as his mother has to go about in this first volume and essentially beg and harangue other people to get her son into a position within the military because this story goes on during the time of the Napoleonic Wars. So she's trying to get her son in the position of adjutant. Adjutant. Crap, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word properly. I'm just going to say adjutant, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so yeah, with that, then we also get introduced, like I said, Andrei Bolkonsky, who is of a higher up family, the Bolkonsky family, and they are very prominent, very wealthy, and he is just kind of, I guess, disheartened with his current life. We see that he is unfulfilled by his wife. He even tells his friend Pierre Bezukov not to get married because he's just unfulfilled in his life in aristocracy. So we see as he's decided to head off to the military. And then with Nikolai is a young man, and he is just going to the military for glory. He wants to, I guess, bring himself up by his bootstraps, though he is still getting quite a bit of money from his family back home. But he has not had nor accepted any specific recommendation letter. He has been attempting to raise himself up by his own merit. So then we have Pierre, who was kind of my favorite character in this first part because honestly, part one of volume one of War and Peace is pretty boring because we just kind of get a lot of stuff on the aristocracy of Russia, and it just kind of drags on a little bit because we got a lot of balls, formalities, and stuff like that, and there's nothing super interesting about it. But we get a couple anecdotes here and there. We see as Pierre at one point is going to this party where this dude ends up drinking an entire bottle of rum with his legs and arms fully dangling out a window. The only thing holding him up is his butt, and he doesn't even hold the bottle. He holds it like that. And, he doesn't hold it like that. He holds it with his lips. Now, we get little interesting tidbits like that, and we ultimately see that, There's also an instance where they end up, at least his little friend group end up tying a police officer to a bear, and it rampages around. So he ultimately ends up getting banished from the city. I believe it was it was Petersburg, I believe, that he got exiled from there, or banished from. And so, yeah, Pierre, he is the illegitimate son of Count Bezukov, who is not in the best of straits. We see as he is dying, and that is the predominant focus of the first volume. Not the first volume, but the first part of the first volume. And we see as they focus on, I guess, the secession crisis, we see as there's multiple parties who are trying to gain something from Count Bezukov. We see as Prince Vasily is trying to, I guess, work things out so that other associates with Count Bezukov end up getting the inheritance when those people know that Pierre is supposed to get the inheritance because Count Bezukov specifically writes out in a document that Pierre should get all of the, I guess, inheritance, and he also had allowed the Tsar Alexander I at the time to know that he wanted to legitimize Pierre. So we see kind of all of that, and we also get to see as Pierre doesn't even know this. Pierre isn't like a massive fan of his father. He's not very close to him, and so we kind of see as Pierre has kind of mixed feelings toward this. We see as he goes and sees his sickly father, but he doesn't have much of a reaction to it. And we also see with, as usual, Anna Mikhailovna is trying to get her son to the best place, trying to swindle out anything that she can. And so this ultimately leads to her trying and like getting alongside with Pierre, but we don't really see the fruits of that just yet. Well, at the point I'm at, I'm just a little bit into volume 2 so far. So, with that, also, we get to see some developments of some early romances. We see as Boris, who I haven't spoken much on yet, ends up kind of falling in love with Natasha Rostov. Wait, yeah, I believe she was a Rostov. Yeah, she was. And she she wants to love him, but she doesn't like feel it to be eternal. And then Sonia falls in love with Nikolai. And Nikolai, that's kind of problematic because I believe they're stated to be like distant, not distant, like distant, but like second cousins or something like that. So that is not very good. But yeah, so back onto the inheritance stuff, we ultimately see as Count Bezukov dies, and we then see as, crap, what's his name? Pierre ends up coming into the full inheritance of Count Bezukov. He gains the title of Count Bezukov and all the wealth and everything. So then part 1 kind of ends off with us seeing as we get introduced more to the Bolkonsky family. We get introduced to Andrei's father. We also get introduced to his sister, Maria, or Maria, but yeah. So we get introduced to Maria, and she is a plain girl. She's not very comely. However, she is looking to get married. Well, she's not necessarily looking to get married, but they're looking to arrange a marriage. We see his Prince Vasily, whose son is, I'm going to say, Anatoly, Anatole. These are a bunch of Russian names I have no clue how to pronounce. So I'm saying Anatoly. And he is trying to propose a marriage here. Now, we don't really get to see much elaboration on that until part 2, but yeah. Not really part 2. Yeah, it is in the later part of part 2. But yeah, so we get introduced to his family, stuff like that. We also learned that his wife, who he's not a big fan of, is pregnant, and she will be staying in a country home while Andrei is all fighting in the war. So then we get into part 2. Part 2 is kind of where it starts to pick up. We get to see a lot of warfare. We get to see the military structure and all of that. And the ones who were sent out to war out of our main cast are Boris, Andrei, and Rostov. Or I'm just going to call him Rostov because that's what he's called throughout the predominant portion of the book, but he's Nikolai Rostov. But yeah, so we get to see they all get sent off to war. They each have different interactions. We see as Andrei is within the higher ranks. He's even speaking with the commander-in-chief, Kutuzov, who obviously is very high up, and we see as Andrei's kind of working with the aristocracy and the higher up of the military. And then with Boris, we actually don't get to see much of Boris until the third part. Now, the predominant focus of the second part is Nikolai, and we see Nikolai's kind of among the riffraff. And one of the most interesting things we get to see in this part is Nikolai's first interaction with actual warfare. We see that in his first battle, he is just dazed. I'm not necessarily dazed, but we see like one very great depiction of war here is how quickly it can happen. We see as he goes from not really expecting anything to then bam, being in battle and then being wounded. Like it's just a snap of the finger on each of these. And so he is wounded in his first battle. And we also get to see how Andrei deals with this and how the higher ups deal with this and all of that and how they interact throughout this battle. But yeah, so then at the end of part 2, we just see a little bit more stuff with the Bolkonsky family. We just see as Anatoly ends up coming, and the Prince Vasily end up coming to kind of try and arrange the marriage between Maria and his son. And we see as they plan on doing this, they get close to even accepting it until ultimately, Anatoly ends up falling for Maria's maidservant. Her name's like Malay Borin or something like that. And then obviously Maria doesn't really want to marry Anatoly because she doesn't want her maidservant to be, I guess, discouraged or disheartened. So she's like, I'll do everything I can for her to ultimately end up marrying him. But she does not wish to marry him herself. So yeah, we kind of see as that plays out. We also get to see, I think this is more in the third part, yeah. Well, it might be towards the end of the part 2. But we see also as the Rostov family ultimately ends up getting a letter from Nikolai telling them that he is in fact alive, but he did get wounded. And we see as how they deal with that and all that and the interaction and everything. And we also get to see in part 2 as Pierre ends up falling in love. He ends up falling with this woman by the name of Helen. She's one of the most beautiful people in the capitals. And he ends up falling in love with her, but he doesn't really fall in love with her. He has desire toward her. He is almost lustful towards her. However, he does not love her. And we see as this is more developed upon in part 3. Well, actually not part 3, but in volume 2. But yeah, so he ultimately does in fact end up getting married to Helen, even though he doesn't completely love her. But it is a good marriage. It's not necessarily a good marriage, but it is a good in the terms of aristocratic marriages. It is well planned, I guess. But yeah, so then we get to part three, which is absolutely the best part of the book so far. And we get to the battle of, I believe it's Olmutz. And once again, we see how the riffraff with Nikolai and how Andrei ends up dealing with this. And we see as Andrei has sent letters from home and he sent some money and all that. He has a brief interaction with Andrei about how Andrei's like, yo, I will give you this, you have this letter of recommendation from your family. And we see as Nikolai denies it. He's like, no, I'm going to put myself up by my bootstraps. And then we get introduced to a very interesting character. And well, not necessarily an interesting character, but an interesting concept. And that is Alexander the First, the Tsar of Russia. He starts coming around the troops and all of that. And we see as Nikolai, or Rostov, ends up falling in love with the Tsar. He sees the Tsar, and all he wants to do is be there for the Tsar, defend the Tsar, interact with the Tsar. And with this, we see as he tries going about it. Ultimately, at the Battle of Olmutz, he tries to get himself into the action so he can see the Emperor, or the Tsar. And so we see as he goes about trying this, and we also see as Andre actually gets to see significant action this time. And one of the also cool things we get to see is we get to see the other emperor on the attacking side, Napoleon Bonaparte. And we've heard all this legend discussion about him prior to this book. However, this is the first time we get to physically see him. And I guess I'll kind of go over Andrei's point of view first. So we see his Andrei. Well, actually, no, I'll go over Rostov's because his happens first, technically. So he sees Rostov. Once the battle happens, it all goes wrong. It all goes awry. They're utterly defeated. But he is supposed to deliver a message to the emperor. And he goes about, he's looking, he's searching, and he can't find him. He's running through onslaught, desolation, and everything, until ultimately he ends up finding the emperor himself, essentially by himself. And he doesn't end up going to the emperor. And then we see someone else comes in, how he helps the emperor cross this ditch that he was going through. And Rostov is kind of dejected by his. He's like, I should have done it. I should have went up to his excellency and spoke and told him the message and all that. But the battle had already been lost, so it was worthless at this point. But yeah, so then I guess I'll focus on Andrei's point of view. So Andrei is probably my favorite in this part or this volume of the book because we see as he actually goes into battle, he shows his gallantry. He is most happy when he's in the military, and we see that as he discusses it himself. And he's not weighed down by his wife or his, I guess, prior connections in actual mainland Russia when he's out in the military. He is simply raising himself up through the ranks so he can be the best man possible through the ultimate capacity of his own. But yeah, so we see this, and we see as he goes into battle. Now, Kutuzov is in battle with him. However, Kutuzov gets wounded, and their standard or their flag starts to fall. And he ultimately ends up grabbing the standard for himself, rallying the troops, and they all rush. However, the standard ends up falling once more because Andrei ends up getting wounded. He sees he falls to the ground, looks up in the sky, and he mentions about how the only place he found true tranquility and calmness was looking up into that sky. Everything else was drowned out around him, but then he falls into unconsciousness. And then, towards the end of the part, we see as Andrei ends up waking back up. And here, he sees the Emperor himself. He sees Napoleon, and Napoleon sees him and says, that is a valiant death or a brave death, something like that. But ultimately, he then sees as Andrei moves, and so he's like, you know what, get him. I'll get him. And we see as Napoleon is depicted as kind of very, I guess, empathetic here. And we see then later on as Andrei ends up waking back up after getting like some first aid and stuff like that he's in fact a prisoner to the French army. And so we then see as Napoleon ends up pulling up, addressing all the higher officers. We see that, in fact, the commander of Alexander's personal guard has been captured, and Napoleon addresses each of them, and they're all very cordial, and Napoleon is very kind to them. However, Andrei isn't like super keen on answering Napoleon's stuff, but he ultimately ends up directing them to leave Andrei amongst the locals, and most of them amongst the locals, because there isn't anything much else that the first aid people can do. And so that is kind of where the part ends. We see Napoleon ends up leaving, and Andrei is left as a prisoner. So yeah, that's what it really was for volume 1 of War and Peace. Now, the first part, if the entire book was like the first part, I would have actually dropped it. I've only ever dropped one book in my entire life, at least in my entire, I guess, career since the 6th grade of reading about every day. But yeah, so I do love it now, though. I'm very interested. I'm very invested, especially now that it's picking up, because it's picked up a lot, especially, like I said, part 2, and then certainly so in part 3. So I cannot wait to read more. I'm so excited to see how else this will play out and what else we'll get to see. And kind of also getting that slight hint of the aristocracy and Russian stuff here and there with Pierre. So yeah, I'm just really excited to see what else there is, and I'll probably be giving you a review on each of the volumes as I get completed up. So thank you very much for watching.